Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever the time zone you're in. This is Prithpal Bogil. I'm a solution architect with Apigee based here in the West Coast. I often help customers with trying to come up with solutions surrounding Apigee, how Apigee fits into the infrastructure. Today, however, I'm here to talk about Apigee Salesforce integration. This is a topic which comes up more often than not, so I figured this would be a good time to put some things together and give you guys a broad brush on the possibilities of integrating with Salesforce through Apigee. I can be reached out on via different channels. You can hit me on Twitter. My handle is @bbogil, LinkedIn, or even through our new and thriving Apigee community. That's an excellent resource for anything Apigee, especially when it comes to any technical questions, best practices. So I would definitely encourage everyone out here who's listening in to connect via Apigee community. Okay. So I'm going to cover at a very high level the Apigee Edge platform. This session assumes that you have some level of familiarity with what an API management platform is all about. So Apigee Edge is an API management platform which has been designed to be insanely scalable, which helps you secure APIs at internet scale. At a high level, the API management platform is distributed into three different layers. The API services tier out here is what is very synonymous with what we have come to know as a API gateway. So within the API services tier, you have the capabilities such as policy-based controls to do traffic management, security, mediation, etc. We also have a nice extensibility layer out there known as the API programmability, wherein you can use the language of your choice, such as Java, Python, JavaScript, etc., to be able to author new policies and extend the Apigee Edge platform. Apigee also happens to be providing an enterprise container for Node.js. In fact, this is an area of very active interest within Apigee, and we have made huge investments within Node.js technology, as you will see in the upcoming slides as well. Last but not the least, the API services layer has the backend as a service component, which gives you the ability to be able to provide for a highly scalable data store where data can be stored closer to the edge to support APIs. It also happens to have a lot of features which are very, very commonplace in mobile-centric use cases, such as the ability to build connections, the ability to do push notifications, social streaming, etc. The developer services capability out here talks more about the developer ecosystem. So this is while the API services talks a lot about API exposure, the developer services starts to focus more on the API consumption aspect. So out here, it's very typical to see a developer portal, API documentation using smart docs where developers can come and interact with APIs, get a good feel for it. That's also the portal where they will come and build apps and self-service around different aspects of application and API development. And then last but not the least, monetization. As you mature in your API program, the need for you to be able to monetize your APIs. So Apigee provides a variety of different capabilities in the area of monetization, such as providing different kind of rate plans, including integration with billing systems. Last but not the least, analytics services is the ability for you to be able to finally have the end-to-end visibility across the entire API program. So you have reports out of the box, dashboards and reports for ops analytics, for application usage, for developer metrics. We also have the ability for you to be able to build custom reports. So for example, one common question is if I am going to be using Salesforce APIs, you can use the analytics services capabilities to actually provide a lot of insight into the real-time usage of the Salesforce APIs. Again, This session is going to be focused a little bit more on just Salesforce integration. So there obviously are very other broad capabilities of analytics in general as well. So let's talk from an architecture perspective. If you look at Apigee Edge, think of that as a proxy layer or a facade which rightfully will sit in the middle of all the API consumers and the API resources or where the API is exposed. So many times we find customers having organic app servers who have web services or APIs hosted out there. And sometimes perhaps you have an ESP or a SOA or a middleware layer, which will service enable some of the legacy systems that you may have as web services APIs. And in increasing capacity, we are also seeing the emergence of cloud providers such as Salesforce. Obviously, you can have a lot more than just Salesforce out here. There are other cloud providers, but we've seen a big emergence of cloud providers such as Salesforce in the entire ecosystem. On the left-hand side out here, it talks about consumers. So your consumers of the APIs may be your mobile applications, point of sale, kiosks, your web applications, but increasingly cloud providers as well, including Salesforce. So in effect, Apigee Edge can act as a gateway to expose your Salesforce APIs amongst other APIs as consumable APIs for a variety of different kinds of consumers. And it also can act as a gateway to do outbound integration from Salesforce into some other backend systems. Okay, so we'll touch on both of those aspects in the remainder session. So real quick, giving a high level overview on the power of the policies. As you know, Apigee API management platform is a policy oriented platform, which means you can use a lot of these out of the box policies to configure your API proxy. An API proxy is nothing but a component which sits smack in the middle of your consumers and the providers, and it can then do some very interesting things with different kinds of policies. So you can do traffic management. One example is spike arrest. So essentially, you can put a spike arrest policy and configure Apigee Edge to block any access to your backend systems beyond a specific TPS threshold. You can use others such as quotas where you can use that for individual developers to give them access to the API proxies at a specific level based on their subscription. You also have a variety of different security policies around OAuth, threat protection, basic authentication, and even support for SAML. From the mediation perspective, the common things that you would expect, JSON to XML, vice versa, a lot of stuff out there to do XSL transformation, message validation, and just enrichment in general. From the extension perspective, you have the ability to use these policies to do service callouts. In fact, this is one of the things I'm going to be using in the Salesforce integration demo today. Along with this, we have other extension capabilities such as making callouts to Java applications, Python. So it really promotes reuse of your existing investments in these technologies, along with leveraging JavaScript to author custom policies as well. As I had mentioned earlier, one very big area of investment for Apigee is around Node.js. So Node.js is an area where there's a lot of excitement and buzz in the industry. A lot of developers are adopting it. More importantly, Apigee has made some strategic investments in Node.js. One example of that investment is what we call as Volos connectors. So Volos are a series of connectors which are built by Apigee. It's an open source project, so the community out there is more than happy to come and contribute to these connectors and even build new connectors based on the Volos framework, which is now open source, built on Node.js. Apigee has built, and this is just a small sample of the different kinds of connectors. So we have a Salesforce connector, uh, Volo Salesforce connector, which I'll be demonstrating today as well. We have connectors for different databases, for LDAP servers, cloud storage connectors, etc. and I will walk you through some of the different connectors that are available and some which are work in progress today. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about Salesforce because that is what the session is about today. So Salesforce as a top leading cloud provider gives you the ability to be able to access its capabilities via APIs. So again, this is just a snapshot from the Salesforce developer portal page. As you can see, they have a variety of different kinds of APIs to access data contained within Salesforce. I have the URL out here. There's a page snapshot. You have the REST API, which you can use to access data and objects within Salesforce, such as account, opportunity, case, etc. Using the REST API, that's one of the things I'm going to be demonstrating today in one of the use cases. They also have a SOAP API if you're using a traditional platform to integrate with them. They have APIs for the chatter capabilities, bulk APIs to deal with a lot of different records, and the list goes on and on and on. So, you can definitely go to developer.salesforce.com/page/salesforce_APIs to get some more information around the different kinds of APIs. Okay, let's talk about what I'm going to demonstrate today. So in this demonstration, I'm going to give you two different flavors of integrating with Salesforce through Apigee. The components in orange out here are the ones which are being used from Apigee, and the other ones blacked out are the ones which are Salesforce capabilities. So I'm essentially going to demonstrate two different API proxies. The first one is known as a Salesforce account API proxy. It is going to leverage the REST API of Salesforce. It also uses the connected apps framework. I'll talk about what that is. But more importantly, it uses some key value map and service callout policies within that API proxy. In this the first piece of the demo, I'm going to show you how you can use service callouts to create different kinds of objects. In this case, we're going to create an account object in Salesforce. The second one out here, the Salesforce Query API proxy, leverages our Volos connector and the Apigee Vault framework to use SOQL-based queries. So SOQL stands for Salesforce Object Query Language. One of the capabilities that Salesforce offers via its APIs is the notion of firing queries to them in a SQL-like way. They call it SOQL, and give you the ability to query different kinds of objects and data contained within Salesforce. All right, so let's get started here with a demo. So let's talk about the Salesforce account API proxy. I'm going to switch here to my Google browser. Let's start from the Salesforce interface. So this is my Salesforce instance. Again, you as a developer has the ability to go to the Salesforce developer portal and then sign up for the Salesforce One platform. So you have the ability to create a free account from this site. I will let you figure that out. You can hit the sign up button and then uh, go out here and then create your own account. So you can get a free developer account from Salesforce, super easy, put in your name, email, all the details, and you're good to go. Okay, so let's come back to this. Once you have that, you can log into Salesforce. And when you log into Salesforce, you will see something similar to this. So some of you guys may be familiar with the Salesforce interface. It's got a tab-based interface here. You have the app picker on the top right out here where you can pick in different kinds of apps. You can see I'm in the sales app. I happen to be an administrator, so I certainly have access to a lot of different tools out here. Again, I'm going to focus on the aspects of Salesforce here which are relevant for this integration demo. So obviously, there are a lot of other capabilities within Salesforce which you can explore at your own pace. The one thing which I do want to call out is the connected apps. So if you go into this top left search bar and type in connected apps is what you need for you to be able to build integration into Salesforce via the APIs. So in this case, let me search for this one more, connected apps. Okay, so out here you can see that I have different kinds of applications built out here. Some of these are pre-provided by Salesforce, and then some, as you can see, I have built it out here. So it's very simple. You can go and say create apps, click on this, click on a new connected app, and you provide the app name, the API name, email, etc., and click on specific things such as enable OAuth settings, etc., and then save. And once you save it, you would see something similar to what I have out here. I'm going to actually click on this link so you can see what's built into this connected app. If I click on this, you can see that once you click the API, enable the OAuth settings, it gives you the consumer key and secret. And this is the consumer key and secret that you will use to make callouts to Salesforce from an API perspective. Obviously, you're going to need other things such as your user ID, password, and also a security token from Salesforce. There is a security easy way to get access to your security token. You can go to setup out here and then click on yourself as the user. And if you go through here, you have the ability to get your security token. One other way to do that is from here. Okay, we can come back to this later on, but again, you have the ability to get your security token from here, which is also something which you're going to need to access the APIs. Okay, so you saw the connected apps, you're familiar with the Salesforce interface. Let's go to the accounts tab out here. Out here, you can see that I've done some different kinds of accounts, but the idea is for you to be able to see different kind of accounts. Many of these data sets are already pre-populated for you in your developer edition account that you create. So you can see accounts, opportunities, and a bunch of other things out here. So this is a very standard Salesforce interface. So let's recap what we looked at here. You logged into Salesforce, we reviewed certain things. More importantly, we looked at how to configure a connected app. That's the one that you're going to need to integrate with Salesforce, at least for the first use case. Okay, so let's now go into the Apigee Edge management user interface. So I'm logged into a demo org at this point in time. Here's my user ID, and I am obviously a org administrator. So that gives me access to a variety of different things within Apigee Edge. From a terminology perspective, I'm in the Apigee Edge Cloud edition. So this is the software, the service offering that Apigee offers. Within the cloud deployment, I'm an org admin, so I'm connected to an organization. An org is a logical construct which will provide you the isolation from other tenants. You can also create a variety of different proxies within the organization, and then you have different kind of environments out here where you can actually deploy those proxies. So this could match your traditional SDLC, dev, test, QA, production environments, and then all the entire interface out here is based on role-based access control, which means you can create specific roles within the organization. You do have some out-of-the-box roles which are provided, but you also have the ability to create additional custom roles that will give you some fine-grained access control into who gets to use what capabilities. Apigee is an API-first company. That's one of our core architecture principles. What we really mean by that is every action that I take out here, there's actually an API which is supporting that action. So let's come back out here. I can quickly search through my Salesforce account proxy. I already have it built out. Let's take a look at what's contained within an API proxy. So within the Salesforce account proxy, you can see that it is pointing to the account object in the backend. In this case, this is the actual instance name you have of Salesforce. If you go back to your Salesforce link, you will see that once you log into Salesforce, you will actually see that up on the top. So that's the URL that you have to reference out here. And then I'm using the REST API, but I'm specifying the account object. This version can change depending on your API version. There's another tool that you can use. It's known as the workbench. Let's search for it here. And using this tool, you can actually log in and get access to the different APIs. So this is a very interesting tool that you can use to play around with the APIs by yourself. And then let's see, I want to use this. Okay, as you can see, I'm not going to demo this tool too much out here, but you can go and build SOQL queries out here. You can pick up specific objects. It will give you the list of different pieces of things that you want to query. And you can use this tool to be able to query different kinds of objects. Okay, so this is a very simple tool that you can use to just work with the Salesforce APIs directly. Super useful when you're doing some initial testing and testing out queries, etc. Again, there are a lot of other things out here which you can explore. Let's get back to this one out here. I do have version 31 of the API, and I'm pointing to the account object. You can make this API proxy fairly generic and dynamically populate what object you may want to create. But for today's demonstration purposes, I am going to be creating account objects. So let me walk you through what's within that API proxy. Within the API proxy, I have used different policies within Apigee's policy framework. You can go to the new policy button out here and you can pick some of these policies. You can use spike arrest, traffic management, concurrent rate limiting, etc. In fact, keep note of this policy. I will not be using it in the demo today, but this is one of the policies that can really be used for you to manage some of the governor and other platform limits that you traditionally have within Salesforce. So that's a big value add that Apigee can provide when you're trying to integrate into Salesforce. So again, you also have other policies such as security. You can do SAML, OAuth, threat protection, mediation, and others out here. So the very first policy in the policy pipeline is a cache policy. So one of the things I'm doing out here is to access Salesforce, you need to provide your login credentials, your security token, and your consumer key and the secret, the one which we saw in the connected app a few minutes back in the Salesforce portal, in the Salesforce login when I had logged in. You need those few things for you to be able to call into Salesforce. Once you call the login endpoint in Salesforce, it will then give you an access token, which you're going to need to be able to make callouts to do certain things. One example of that is, let's say, creating an account object. So I have some caching policies built in where once I do it for the very first time, I actually cache the access token for some time so that I don't have to keep making callouts to the different to the service endpoint, the authentication endpoint of Salesforce to keep on getting the access token. I can cache it up front, and then once it finds in the cache, it can go directly to the Salesforce account object creation. But assuming I'm coming here for the first time, it does not find anything in the cache. I have this key value map policy out here, and as you can see, I'm using the key value map. So you would need to go and use your management APIs or perhaps another API proxy to actually populate this key value map. So key value map is a cool feature within the API policy stack where you can use that key value map to store things such as credentials, common mapping things. In this case, I've used this store-to-store credentials. You do have an Apigee vault where you can store service accounts and credentials in a more secure way. For the purpose of this demo, I have leveraged a key value map. So anyways, you would need to populate the key value map with the values for the SFDC username, the password, the client secret, etc. Again, I'm using an environment scoped key value map. You can use an org scoped key value map as well, and then you would set this thing in the specific way. Once I have that, I prepare my request to call the Salesforce endpoint, the login endpoint. Once I have that, I finally call the login token endpoint, and on successful authentication of this, Salesforce is going to give me an access token. And this is the one which I then cache into the Apigee cache. So the very first time, nothing is going to be found out here. I'm going to load the credentials. I'll make a service call out to the token endpoint of Salesforce, and then I will cache the access token for future use so I can avoid getting into invoking this thing every single time. Okay, so there's one other thing I need to show you, which is conditional steps. So as you can see, you saw the steps left to right. What I'm trying, I do a conditional check to see if the Salesforce SFDC cache access token cache is empty, then I will create the request, send it to Salesforce, extract it, and then populate it. If, however, when I load it up the very first time, and if the access token cache is not null, it has all the right data, then I don't need to call the other policies in the mix. Okay, so again, what this says out here is that all the rest of the policies will get executed if the cache is empty, which it will be for the very first time. Okay, after this happens, the default target endpoint, as you know, is a Salesforce account object. So I can use this to actually create an account object within Salesforce. Here is the trace tool, which is a very important utility for any API developer. I'm going to use this Salesforce, the trace tool, to trace and diagnose the Salesforce account API proxy. So let's get started out here. I'll click on the start trace session button, and you can see it has started a trace session. It's usually good for about 10 minutes. I'll come to Postman, where you can see I have created different kinds of accounts, different kinds of URLs out here. You can really use any REST client of your choice. I just happen to be using Postman. Let's click on the SFDC create account API proxy. You can see that it's pointing to our Salesforce account API proxy within Apigee. And we'll give a simple name out here, Salesforce demo test. The industry type is technology. The type is prospect. The city is Los Angeles. And again, we can just change the few digits out here to make sure that it gets recorded. So really what I'm doing out here is to my API proxy, the Salesforce account API proxy, I'm passing in these parameters. Behind the scenes, when I hit send, it will actually authenticate against Salesforce, create, get a session, get an access token back, and then use that to then create an account object within Salesforce. So let's hit send. Assuming the demo gods are with us, looks like they are. I got a Salesforce record ID back from Salesforce. Okay, let's hop over to the trace session out here. You can see it did a variety of different things. It had to go through all of these out here, make a call out to Salesforce. As you go through the trace tool and you click on specific policies, you'll get a lot of useful information about that policy out here. So super important as an API developer for you to be able to use this information, flow variables, etc., as you're diagnosing your APIs. So it gets makes a call to the authentication endpoint, gets the access token, and then finally makes a call to the Salesforce server to the account object. And you can see the amount of time it takes within the API proxy versus the amount of time it is spending while getting stuff from Salesforce. So you have a very good idea of the overall performance and what components gonna take what time. Okay, so let's go to Salesforce here. Let's go to the account objects tab. Let me click on go. And you can see that you have all the different account objects here. And then on the left out here, you can see the Salesforce demo test entry that we just created in real time a few minutes back from our API proxy. Okay, so you can see that it has successfully created the account object, given the account name, picked up the type, the industry, the billing address, etc. Again, you can use this approach to populate a lot more things, even create dependent records as you see fit. As you will notice, this is the exact same record ID number which we got back from Salesforce when we actually invoked our API proxy. So hopefully this gave you a good idea of how easily you can actually use Apigee to integrate using service callouts to Salesforce. So this was approach one, where we are using Apigee API proxy and service caller policies to create entries within Salesforce. Okay, let's talk about approach number two. Let me bring up the slide one more time. So in approach two, let's recap what we did. So we essentially looked to the Salesforce account API proxy. We use the Salesforce REST APIs. I showed you how to use connected apps within Salesforce. That will give you the client ID and secret that you need to be able to make API calls into Salesforce. We use a service callout policy and a key value map. Again, you have the liberty to just take a slightly different approach if you like to, but these are some of the common pieces that are going to be involved in creating integration assets to Salesforce. Okay, let's talk about approach number two. This is the Salesforce Query API proxy. It uses the SOQL or the Salesforce Object Query Language mechanism. Again, this is a mechanism also available in the REST API, but it uses the Apigee Volos connector for Salesforce and the Apigee Vault, which is a secure way of storing your credentials or service accounts to various things, including Salesforce and other providers. So I'm going to use this API proxy to demonstrate how you can use this approach to get data out of Salesforce. So in the first approach, I showed you how you can create entries inside Salesforce. In this case, I'm going to use this to query different kinds of objects out of Salesforce and present them as RESTful data within the Apigee API. Okay, before I go into showing you that specifically, let me go out here to the GitHub link out here where we have all the Volos connectors. So it's github.com/apigee-127/volos-connectors. In this link, you can go out here and see the different kinds of adapters and connectors that we're building out here. API connectors for SaaS. So, some are work in progress. Again, we constantly keep updating this page out here. So definitely come to this page often. We have cloud storage API connectors, asynchronous messaging connectors, and a whole lot more. If you click on this link, it takes you to this page here. And you can go to this page out here and browse through the different pieces of how to configure your Volo Salesforce connector. There are different pieces in that framework, which I will touch on during the demo here. But again, this gives you every piece of instruction that you need to configure your Volos connector and get yourself working with Salesforce. One other thing I do want to call out is the usage of the Apigee Vault. We use the Apigee Vault for local secure storage. What I really mean by that is I'm using this in this API proxy to actually store my credentials to Salesforce. So you can use the Vault and the provided JavaScript libraries to access the Vault to store your credentials. which can be used while making callouts to Salesforce and other systems. Okay, so let me hop back into the Salesforce interface for a second. You can see the different kind of opportunity entries that you have. Again, a lot of these data sets are automatically populated for you when you create a free developer edition account on Salesforce. So that's one of the good things, that you don't have to end up creating different things out here. You have a lot of data to query. You have this, you have cases and other things which you can go and look at what's in here. Again, different kinds of cases. So again, a lot of data for you to play with. Let's get back into the Apigee API management Edge user interface. And this time I'm going to search for the Salesforce Query API proxy. So this is a node-based API proxy. It's actually very, very simple to build an API proxy. If I go back to the API proxy button, all I have to do is click on plus API proxy. I can build an API proxy using an existing backend service, which is what I had used as an option for my earlier Salesforce account API proxy. I can use an API bundle, which is nothing but once you develop an API proxy, you can download that as an API bundle. So as another developer, I can import that and use that to bootstrap and get working with the API proxy. You can also point to a WSDL where you can do SOAP to REST conversion and things of that nature. So it becomes very, very easy for you to build RESTful APIs from SOAP endpoints. You can also have a node target endpoint. This is a very interesting one. So if you think about Apigee Edge as your agility layer, and assuming you don't have any APIs which are built today or any backend services to support APIs, you can use a node target API proxy. And from a consumption perspective, it will feel and behave like a real production grade API, except you can mock responses, you can have static data response coming back, you can get a little bit more fancy and use things like a key value map, or perhaps in the backend as a service component to provide dynamic responses. You can also use this to build new Node.js proxies, and then this is what you would use uh, for something like Volos, either new or existing, depending on which component you build first. Okay, so let's go back into our Salesforce Query API proxy. I'm back in here. Let me spend a few seconds here on the overview section. You can see that it is pointing to a Node.js script. What that really means is the default target endpoint for this API proxy is actually a Node script. This is a Node server which is running and processing requests. Let's hop into this API proxy. As you can see, there are very few policies here because really at the end of it, it talks to a Node application which is running. The key file out here is Volos Salesforce.js. That's a Node script. Let me expand this out here. So you can see that it does a few things out here. It sources in the Volo Salesforce package, which you just saw here on GitHub. It requires some other packages. I'll spend a few minutes here on the query to REST map, which will show you how you can use different kinds of queries. But more importantly, it accesses the vault where we have stored the credentials. And then once it loads the credentials, it then uses the JavaScript API using the SF connector object here, passing in the profile which is loaded as part of the stuff from the vault, uses the REST map, which we're going to talk about in a few seconds here, and then essentially it's a server endpoint which is waiting for requests to come into it. So when you're actually calling this Salesforce Query API proxy, the request will come in here, and this will then process based on the specific path that you sent in. It will send that request over to Salesforce, get the data for you in real time, and then return the response which gets displayed here. So let's take a look at the query to REST map. In this case, I can use this feature, this capability, to actually specify the different kinds of data sets that are most likely to query. So in this case, you can see I have given this a short name, opti, short for opportunity. I have a basic query, and I have an expanded query. So you can specify expanded equals true or false, and depending on that, it will use one of the other queries out here. So it gives you some flexibility. You can also specify the query parameters, which will give you the ability to actually get specific with what kind of records you may need to load, and then the expectation that you will provide these as parameters in your API proxy request. So you can see the different kinds of queries out here. Again, this is just a startup list. You can come in and add more queries out here using the same format. And once you save the API proxy, it will automatically then start serving those different kinds of objects that you're trying to query for. All this packaging is done by default. You can also use the Apigee Volos instructions out here. It actually does show you towards the end as to how to deploy the API proxy. Again, if there are any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to help you in any of the different channels that you can use to reach out to me. So getting back to this out here, let's hit the trace session on. Let's go back to Postman. And in this case, I'm going to query the opportunity object. You can see that's the URI out here of my API proxy. I have plugged in OPPTY, which matches with this query map out here. Because I've asked for this, is going to leverage this query. Because I said expanded equals false, is going to pick up the simpler query. Let's try and hit this API. When I hit send, you can see it's actually getting data back from Salesforce. You did see the opportunity objects that I just showed you out here in the Salesforce interface. So you can see it's actually making a real-time call into that API using Sockle and getting us a lot of different opportunity objects back from Salesforce. If I go back to the trace tool here, you can see it has made a request. The node script picks it up, processes it, and then sends the request over to Salesforce using the credentials in the Apigee vault. Let's take a look at another one out here. I'm going to query the case object, hit send, and in this case you can see it gets a lot more data about the case object. In this case, I use the expanded equals true I built into the query, and you can see I get some case data back from Salesforce. So again, super easy for you to be able to do integration into Salesforce. I'm going to go back to my slide deck here. So just recap, in the second approach, I use the Salesforce Query API proxy, and I'm using the Sockle capability or Salesforce object query language to query information from Salesforce. In this case, I showed you how I could query an opportunity object, case objects. Likewise, you can update the query to REST map.js file and add new queries for new objects as you see fit. You can do nested queries, etc. It also uses our Volos connector framework and Apigee Vault to securely store the credentials. And this is another approach to integrating with Salesforce. So I covered two different approaches out here. Let's very quickly recap and review what are some of the benefits of actually using Apigee as a gateway to integrate to Salesforce, both when you're trying to integrate and call into Salesforce, so inbound into Salesforce, and also using Apigee Gateway when you're making calls from Salesforce to other systems using their Apex callout framework. You can use Apigee as a gateway to actually call out to other backend systems as well through Salesforce. And obviously has a lot of benefits using those two approaches. One which is using Apigee before or front-ending Salesforce, and the other which is Apigee behind Salesforce when Salesforce is trying to integrate into other systems. So let's take a look at what some of those benefits are. The first and foremost is the end-to-end visibility. If Apigee is used in the mix, both when it front ends Salesforce or when it is sitting behind Salesforce. It gives you real-time role-specific analytics on the actual Salesforce API usage. So it gives you a lot of visibility into your Salesforce API usage, which you never had before. It also provides a lot of operational intelligence around the performance. If you have some response time and performance concerns, these rich analytics will give you a very good insight into what's taking longer, whether it's some policies within the API proxy or it's the actual Salesforce API call. So you certainly now have access to information and visibility into the integration, which you did not have before. This one I think is a very, very important benefit. So essentially what we're talking about in the effective control over force.com platform limits is, and you can go and look at this link, login.salesforce.com/help/pdf/en/salesforce underscore app underscore limits underscore cheat sheet.pdf. This link actually gives you the ability, uh, this link actually shows you all the different limits that are inherent within Salesforce platform. For those of you who have been using Salesforce for a while, will probably relate to this very, very easily. So using Apigee Edge, you can use a lot of traffic management policies, such as spike arrest, such as the concurrent rate limiting policies. And you can use that to be able to effectively control your platform apex limits. You can use Apigee to control your static apex limits, such as default timeouts of callouts, maximum size of callouts, request and response payloads. So within the gateway, within the Apigee API policy framework, you have the ability of shaping your request or response. And then more importantly, you can use some concurrency policies to be able to limit the amount of concurrent connections that are opened into Salesforce. You're also able to use the rate limiting capabilities within Apigee Edge policy framework to control the amount of requests that go when you're using chat or REST APIs. So again, we don't have time to get into each and every feature out here, but in summary, this using Apigee Edge in the mix gives you a lot of control over your force.com platform limits. So definitely keep this feature in mind. The last but not the least is, because of the nature of where Apigee Edge sits in the stack, you have the ability to provide consistent and flexible security when you're trying to access Salesforce, both inbound and outbound. So by leveraging OAuth, SAML, all those capabilities are built into Apigee Edge, along with the notion of API products. API products are nothing but concepts which will give you the ability to combine and offer fine-grained control into your API usage. At the proxy level, you can also use other constructs within the Apigee stack to provide security and compliance tracking. Hope this session was useful. Um, Here's a list of resources that I have used to put this presentation together, and so can you. Definitely reach out to us at the Apigee community site. It's live and thriving. We actually have customers who participate in that community at a very, very active level, and give you, a very, very unique experience into answering any question that you may have around Apigee technology. So community.apigee.com. As always, the Apigee documentation site, apigee.com/docs, gives you the ability to just have all kinds of documentation around different concepts on Edge, BAS, etc. You can also go check out our blogs. There are some very interesting blogs that are posted out there on a daily basis. Again, please, if you don't have an Apigee Edge account, you can use our developer edition, which is free for life. You can go sign up today, accounts.apigee.com/accounts/sign up. And if you go to that link, you can sign up and you will have an Apigee Edge org in our cloud deployment for free. You can use that to build the API proxy that I just built. And then also I use the Salesforce developer portal account, developer portal, which I showed you some snippets of it. You can go out here to access Salesforce documentation, integration patterns, different approaches. You can also go out here to sign up for a new Salesforce org, which is also a developer edition org that you can use to practice the integration. Hopefully you guys got some value out of this session, and feel free to reach out to me on any of the channels that I described: Twitter, LinkedIn, or community.apigee.com. Thanks for your time, and I will talk to you guys later.